This project is the easiest of everything that I have today, super quick as well. I'm just taking 3 of these little plaster of Paris bunnies. I'm gonna go ahead and give each of them a couple of coats of a different colored chalk paint. This one I mixed with Antique Sky and I added a little bit of navy blue, so it's sort of a bluey green color. I'm going to do the other one in a light sage, and the final one is going to be in a eucalyptus green. Once I'm done with that and they're fully dry, I'm going to give them a nice, shiny, glossy top coat, and they look just like ceramic. For pennies on the dollar, I was able to create some beautiful high-end looking decor. I am super excited to share this hack with you. I am going to be printing on flour sack cloth fabric. I have cut out a piece that is much smaller than my printer paper. You can see that here. This is one of the tricks to remember. Make it much smaller than your paper because you don't want the feeder to catch hold of that fabric and then start tearing it up or possibly jamming it into your printer. Next, you're going to use some masking tape and make sure that you tape down every little bit of that fabric. It has to be taped down completely so there's no free edges hanging around. You also need to make sure that it's as flat as possible. You can see here that I pulled this one up because it had a little bit of a wrinkle in it and I smoothed it down again, making sure that, again, everything is taped down. This will really help. If you wanted to iron your fabric, you could do that as well. I haven't tried it with anything thicker than the flour sack cloth, but I think this is absolutely amazing. One thing that I forgot to mention is that I put this on cardstock. I always have some pieces of cardstock in my stash. If you don't have white, it doesn't have to be white. It can be any type of cardstock, even a piece of scrapbook paper that is cut to size to fit into your printer. Of course, you won't be able to use the paper anymore, so just keep that in mind. Depending on your project, you might also want to make sure that your fabric is much bigger than your project. I'm using this tiny little embroidery hoop, so I just made sure that I had enough fabric. But you can see on the one side there, I got it a little bit close. So next time I've got to make sure that I put my image right smack in the middle. Now I'm going to take the larger hoop and just push it down on top of the smaller hoop and then screw it together to tighten it up. To get a nice clean fabric cut, I'm using my fabric scissors. You can use regular scissors if you want, but I just always find that it's a little harder to cut a nice even piece. So fabric scissors are the way to go if you're cutting any type of material. Just make sure that you don't cut any paper or anything with your fabric scissors because that will immediately dull the blade and you'll be struggling again. With the leftover fabric, I just cut slits in the bottom and then tore it. I'm going to make 3 little ribbon pieces out of this. I'm also going to be adding some black and white striped ribbon and a black and white butcher twine. I thought I would quickly show you how I have been learning how to make a messy bow. I always start with a long piece of twine at the bottom in the opposite direction because that's what I'm going to be using to tie everything together. And then I just start layering and changing direction of each of them. And it just really doesn't matter how you do it. It just has to look a little messy. I guess that's why it's called a messy bow. Then once everything's together, I just grab the 2 ends of the twine, tie it really tight in a knot. And I always like to shake up my bow just to kind of get it a little messier. I don't know, just to kind of pull things apart a little bit, but I'm always kind of bending it and fluffing it and shaking it. I glued the bow on top, added a flower with a button and some greenery, and I think this one turned out really pretty as well.
This galvanized pot from the Dollar Tree, And what I'm going to do with this is take a regular kitchen sponge and some chalk paint. This is Martha Stewart chalk paint in the color clay. And I'm going to dab it all the way around the pot. I just want to make sure that the lettering is covered up, but I do want a little bit of that galvanized metal to show through. The reason I'm using the sponge is because I don't want to see any brush strokes. While I wait for the pot to dry, I'm going to mix up some textured paint. I'm pouring in a latex paint. This is just something that I had left over in my house, and I'm pouring it right into a little plastic container that has a screw top lid. As you can see, I save all of my jars. I added a couple tablespoons of baking soda. Now, with this technique, you want to add a little bit first and then add more if you need it. I found that I did need a little bit more just to get the consistency and the texture that I wanted. What I'm doing now is just taking this little brush and I'm pouncing it right on top of the other color, and I'm getting a really wonderful concrete kind of look. I'm getting some bigger chunks here and there and some smaller chunks, and I'm just going to keep going all the way around the pot until I get the look I want. Once the paint was almost dry, I'm taking the same sponge and the same original color, which is the darker color, and I'm just kind of sponging it on because I want to get a little bit of a deeper shade, but I still want some of that lighter color to show through. So I'm going very lightly with my sponge and blending it in. I wanted to camouflage the little skinny handles on this, so I'm taking some of this white nautical rope that I have, and I started by hot gluing a piece of it down, which is what I'm holding with my thumb, and I'm just going to go ahead and start wrapping it all the way around the handles, gluing it in a couple of spots as I go. When I got to the end of the first handle, I decided to continue the nautical rope underneath the rim of the bucket all the way around. This way I didn't have to make any extra cuts to stop the rope, but it also made it look more high-end and complete. Where I had to cut the ends, I just kind of let those edges hang down on either side of the handle, but I am taking a little bit of Mod Podge and I'm just going to run it across those edges so they don't fray even more. I have a new obsession, and that is printing on white tissue paper. I take a little piece of tissue paper that's just a touch smaller than the printer paper. I tape it across the top and about halfway down the sides, and then I run it through my printer like usual. And this is what I get, a beautiful little label that I can decoupage right on top of my project. I'm going to use Mod Podge and put a thin layer where my label is going to sit. Then I always use my brush to pick up my little label because they are really thin and sometimes it's hard to just place it right where you want it to be. If you have it on your brush, you can just kind of eyeball it and set it down right in the center. Making sure that I have a little bit of Mod Podge always on my brush. You don't want to have your brush too dry because that will tear the tissue paper. Start from the center and work your way out, gently pushing the wrinkles and the air bubbles out. This is a textured pot, so I know I'm going to have some wrinkles and bubbles in it, but if you have too many, you can do what I'm doing now. You just take your brush, make sure again it has a tiny bit of Mod Podge on it, just pounce up and down on top of the bubbles and the wrinkles, and they will just get pushed right into the Mod Podge underneath, and all of those bubbles will disappear. Now I'm going to blend in the edges of that tissue paper just a little bit. So I'm taking my sponge and I'm taking the lighter color, not the baking soda texture, just the regular paint. And I'm using the edge of the kitchen sponge to just go all the way around and camouflage that tissue paper. I also dabbed just a wee bit on top of the tissue paper where it's black just to show a little bit more texture and distressing. I'm going to be adding some eggs into this, but I wanted to show you a trick. I don't like filling all of my buckets and containers with so much foam or styrofoam that I end up wasting it. So what I do is take an old piece of cardboard, and I always save the sides and the lids from my Amazon boxes. The boxes themselves come in handy, but I always use the flaps for this. I'm going to cut out a circle so it fits into the bucket about an inch down from the top, and then I'm going to hot glue it in place. To camouflage the cardboard, I'm just going to scatter some reindeer moss all over the top of it. I'm not even going to glue it down because I might change my mind after Easter and use this bucket for something else. What I'm doing now is just taking some black paint and a stiff brush and flicking the paint onto the eggs so they get a little speckled. So I've got this sweet little bunny from the dollar store, and I went ahead and glued him down to the cardboard. And now I'm just going to glue the eggs just right onto the moss because they're not really going to go anywhere, but I just don't want any of them to fall out. And I can also then place them where I want them to be. Please excuse my black finger there. I didn't go and wash my hands after I flicked the eggs, and now it looks really awful seeing it here while I'm editing, so I do apologize. I've got some tiny eggs that I'm going to add into the mix as well, and I'm even going to give him one to hold in his little paws. I wanted to put some type of little sign above the bunny's head, so I decided to grab this wood slice, drill a hole in it so it would hold a bamboo skewer. I'm going to go ahead and glue the skewer in, then cover the skewer with some white butcher twine, and then write 5 cents on it and pop it in behind the bunny's head. I think this project turned out super cute. This little bunny with the sleeping position in the wreath with all of the eggs and the pretty flowers is just absolutely adorable. Now, if I would have been thinking this would have been really great for my next project because it's a round shape, but I only have one of these, so I ended up doing this to it instead. I'm taking a piece of white tissue paper and just adding a glue stick along it and putting it on top of this. I wanted this picture to be not quite so bright, more of a vintage look, something old and something that's been around for a while. Those colors are pretty, but again, just too bright for my style. So I thought this would work, and I think it did. I have a specific size frame that I'm going to put this bunny into, so I'm using my paper trimmer to trim down the edges. I also didn't have a larger piece of tissue paper and I didn't want any seams in there, so this ended up turning out to be the best project for this bunny anyway. I'm going to use the glue stick again and just apply this bunny sheet to the backing of the frame, which is right here. I believe it's an 8 by 10. Since there's a little bit of the backing still peeking through, I'm going to take some strips of drop cloth and make somewhat of a mat for this bunny picture. I'm going to just glue the strips with hot glue right along the bottom and the sides of the bunny, and then I'll be able to put it into the frame and there won't be any of the brown showing. I'll just trim off the extra edges and it will fit perfectly into the frame. The frame that I'm using was something that I've repurposed a couple of times. It had black on the bottom. I gave it one coat of Parisian gray chalk paint and just went over it very lightly with my sanding block to bring out some of the black and some of the original wood.
For this project, I'm using 2 of my Dollarama bunnies again, taking my flat Rust-Oleum matte finish spray paint. This is just the clear, and what this does is take some of the shine away from these bunnies so the paint has a better opportunity to stick. I'm going to give these two bunnies a few coats of white chalk paint. I did have to go over this 3 times to make sure that I got really good coverage, but I really liked the little dimpled texture of these rabbits because it still showed up even with 3 coats of paint. I love creating tissue paper transfers. That's what I'm going to call them from now on because they are transferring an image onto an object. You use tissue paper to print off using your regular printer, a laser jet, or an inkjet. I have an inkjet, it works just fine. You use Mod Podge and you attach it to your project. Make sure you have some Mod Podge on your item first and then very gently lay your tissue paper on top. When you're smoothing it out, I always like to start from the middle and work my way out and always have a good amount of Mod Podge on my brush so I don't tear the tissue paper. Once they were dry, I sprayed them with a clear sealer. This one happened to have a little bit of shine to it, and I really love how they turned out. I picked up this bunny on a little wood pedestal or candlestick at my local Dollarama store, and it is actually quite pretty just on its own. The back isn't finished, so that would be something that I would change anyway. And the florals were pretty, but just really not my style. So what I'm doing here is just painting the top portion of it gray. I'm also going to be painting the back of it gray, so it has the same look on both sides. And I'm going to leave the thickness on the sides of the bunny in white. I've got a buffalo check black and white napkin from the Dollar Tree that I've cut down into some strips, and I'm going to use Mod Podge and place it all along the side of the bunny in that thick spot. That's why I wanted to keep it white. So I'm going to very gently just press it in with my fingers and then continue working all the way around the one edge of the bunny, and then I'll do the other side too. Once the Mod Podge had dried, I just took this rough emery board and very gently just started sanding off the excess tissue paper. So the main reason that I painted the sides of the bunny gray is just to camouflage those bright colors from the florals underneath. Now I'm going to take a dry brush with some white chalk paint and go over the bunny and do it pretty heavily. I'm starting off fairly light to make sure that I don't go too heavy, but I end up doing about 3 or 4 layers of dry brushing just to bring out a little bit more brightness with the white chalk paint. I got this set of silicone floral stamps from bbcraft.com. And if you're not familiar with Beebee Craft, they have a ton of crafting supplies that are really not that expensive. And I do have a link for them down in my description box. I'm going to peel off these silicone stamps and then place them down the way I would stamp them to create a pattern. I'm starting off with some of the larger florals, and then I'm going to pull off some of the smaller ones and then add some bits of greenery as well. Now I'm going to take what's called the mask, which is literally just the sheet that covers up the stamps, and you'll be able to just press this down and that will become your surface of stamping. So all of the stamps will stick to this piece of plastic, and then you'll be able to ink it up and use it over and over again. The ink I use is just from a dollar store. It was $4 or $5 for this ink pad, and I really like it because the sponge part of it is nice and soft, so you get really good ink adhesion on your stamps. I'm going to very carefully place it on my rabbit and then hold it down with one hand and then use the other hand or fingers to just press down very gently, trying really hard not to move the stamps. I like how this pattern turned out. I think it's really pretty. It has just enough amount of greenery and stems, and this looks so pretty against the rustic background of the bunny. I'm going to go ahead and ink up the stamps again and then just turn the stamps so they don't go on exactly the same way. And then I'll be able to just fill up the bunny. I think I finally mastered the messy bow and I really enjoy making them now. I used to kind of dread making them because they wouldn't turn out, but I've kind of embraced the not so perfect look of them. I'm taking some of this wider ribbon from the Dollar Tree in a beautiful gray color, and I'm just going to be trimming it down into 3 narrower pieces. I also have some black and white twine. I have some cotton rope that I'm going to be pulling apart, and I also have some buffalo check ribbon that I'll also be cutting down a little bit narrower. It's been easier for me to lay down a piece of twine up and down like you see me doing here, and then laying my ribbons across. And that just makes sure that I have something to tie everything in place once I'm done. So I'm just going to start layering my ribbons in not really a pattern, but just kind of grabbing them, moving them around every which way, and just trying to make sure that they all stay in place. This gray one was really giving me a hard time. Once I felt that it was fluffy enough, I took the piece of twine and then just simply tied a really snug knot, making sure that it was in the center. I fluffed it up a little bit and kind of bent some of the ribbons down so they'd be hanging, and then just trimmed off any of them that were a little too long. Then I'm going to just glue this right on top of my bunny and give him a sweet little bow right at his neck. I finally found my stash of buttons, so I added a white one. I'm also going to add a few little greenery sprigs and some pretty pink flowers. For the final touch, I added a couple of pieces of greenery to the bottom of the candlestick and added a couple of pink flowers there too. I really love how my bunny turned out, and I hope you love him too. I'm starting this first project by painting some of these small wooden eggs that I get at a local craft supply store, and they are also part of one of my craft kits that you can find on Etsy. I'm painting them with some sheepskin colored chalk paint. This is by Folk Art, and it's a really creamy white color, almost an ivory. I'm using some of the sheepskin chalk paint, but I'm adding a little bit of this taupey beige color just to deepen it up a little bit. This is a bird. Actually doesn't really look like a bird when you're looking at it this way, but it is a ceramic bird and it has the hooks on it that you can hang it on the side of your planter pot. Well, I'm going to be taking those hooks off later, but for now, they're really handy because I can just hang on to the bird while I'm painting it. 2 coats of this paint mixture will give it fairly good coverage, and that's all I need. I'm using some antique wax now, and I've just got a paper towel that I've dipped into the wax, and then I'm just offloading some of it onto another paper towel. And I'm going to just dab this antiquing wax right on top of the bird. I want to accentuate all of the raised edges of the bird rather than all of the grooves. I'll keep repeating this process until I get the look on the bird that I want. I want him to be kind of aged and vintage looking and kind of dirty too, which is what you achieve with antique wax. The eggs are completely dry now, and I'm taking this fan brush, dipping it in some water, and then dipping it in some sage green paint. I'm going to give the eggs a little bit of a splattered look with the paint. So this first time that I tried, nothing was coming off the brush. I realized that I didn't have enough water in it. So I'm going to do it again, grab some paint, put some water on it, and then just go to town tapping away. The inspiration for this project came from this beautiful blue bowl. I picked it up at the thrift store. It doesn't have any nicks or scratches in it. It's not anything special. It's not vintage by any means. On the bottom, it says dishwasher, freezer, and microwave safe. So we're definitely not breaking any of the vintage rules. I've got some Spanish moss and I just put a big chunk of it right inside the bowl. To remove the hooks that were supposed to be for hanging on the pot, I'm just taking my pliers here and very gently just working that metal back and forth until it has a chance to snap. And that just prevents breaking any of the ceramic on the bird. I added a wood block to the one corner of the bowl. That's going to help support the bird so he doesn't fall in. I've placed the eggs in the nest, but I haven't used any hot glue. I'm going to try and minimize how much glue I use because I know I'm going to want to use this bowl in a different project at some point. I'm taking some of this greenery that's got sort of a dusting on it. To me, it reminds me of mini lamb's ear. And I have two of the natural solo wood flowers, and then I have one that's a little bit bigger that's called a skinned flower. And I'm just gluing those florals right onto the greenery stems. I'm going to place the bird on the block and I do add a little bit of hot glue to the bottom of his tail later on, just so he's secure for the time being and doesn't fall over. I'm gluing some of the florals to the bowl, but hot glue is really forgiving on this type of material and you can usually pop it off fairly easily. I'm going to continue adding some florals around the bird. I've got some little pink wax flowers and I'm just going to keep adding until I think it looks good. Now, one thing that I have kind of done through my channel and on my videos is go fairly quickly through the part when I'm adding all of these florals. And I would like to pose the question to you. Let me know if you want to see me doing all of this floral arranging and how I add all the details in regular time, or if you're okay with me speeding it up a little bit because otherwise my videos would be really long. So let me know what you think. If you like to see them in regular time or if the little bit faster is okay too. I am absolutely in love with the color of that bowl, and I really love how this project turned out. I found this tiny little vase at the thrift store and I just really loved the rope detail at the top. It's a little schmutzy, so I cleaned it up, but later on I'm going to give it a fresh coat of paint, which will also help. I'm taking a part of a pool noodle and I'm just pushing it down as far as it will go into the pot without it jumping back out. And then I'll just take a serrated knife and very carefully cut off the excess pool noodle. I found this brown plastic stem in my stash and I'm going to use that as the base for this little project. I've just got it in the center of the pool noodle because of course they have a hole, and I've added some hot glue just to try and hold it in place a little bit. Once this has almost set up, I'm going to add little bits of pool noodle to stuff into the hole and make sure that this is really secure. Next, I took another tiny little piece of pool noodle and just hot glued it to the very top of the stick. And I'm doing that simply because I'm using a tiny little wicker ball as the base for this topiary. And I wanted to be able to have somewhere to glue it on. So I'm just very gently going to be pushing that on. And then I'll add a lot of hot glue at the top and at the bottom of the wicker ball just to keep it steady on the stick. Usually when I do topiaries, I do greenery, but this time I decided to do a lavender topiary ball. And I thought this would be so much fun. So I'm taking some of these lavender picks that I have, and I'm just going to be cutting them in threes, and then some of them I'll cut in twos, and I'm just going to start gluing it onto the wicker ball. Now, because there's some holes, I'm leaving some of the stem pieces on because that will give the hot glue something better to grip onto, and then I'll be able to just push it right into the wicker ball. Now, I know sometimes topiary balls are really nice and round, but I'm going to make this one a little bit more fun, and I want to have some bits and pieces hanging out all over the place. Here's what it looks like, and now I'm going to do the same thing with some of this little greenery. I'm going to trim off some of the pieces, just tiny little stems, and then I'll hot glue them all over the topiary itself just to give it a little bit more color and texture. Before I go any further, I'm going to take some of that same sheepskin chalk paint by Folk Art, and I'm going to give this one coat just to freshen it up a little bit. I took one of my printables and printed it off really tiny on some tissue paper, and now I'm going to cut it out really nice and close to the edges. Using a small brush, I'm going to put a generous amount of Mod Podge where I want the label to be. Then I'm going to use the brush to pick up the label and center it on my project. Then take some more Mod Podge on my brush, starting from the center and working my way out, just smoothing it down and making sure that there aren't too many wrinkles or bubbles. Then I'm going to go over the whole pot with one coat of Mod Podge so it has the same sheen. To finish off my topiary tree, I'm going to use some reindeer moss and just hot glue it right on top of the pool noodle. And you'll have to excuse the brightness of the sun coming through, but I just couldn't resist. We've had so many cold weather days up here in Ontario, Canada, and I needed to see the sunshine, and it just felt so good. I added a few little bits of the lavender and some greenery at the bottom of the topiary on top of the reindeer moss, and this project turned out super cute.
For this first project, you'll need some tumbling tower blocks from the Dollar Tree. I'm going to glue 4 of them together just using hot glue, and I like to use this square that you can also get from the Dollar Tree just to help me keep everything nice and straight, and I have something to push against to make sure I don't have too big of a gap where the hot glue is in between the joints. You'll need 4 of these in sets of 4. I'm going to do the exact same thing, but these blocks are much bigger. I get these from my local Dollarama store, but you could also find some regular size Jenga blocks or tumbling tower blocks at your thrift store or even at Walmart, and I have seen them online too. Next, you'll need 2 of the tower blocks again. I'm working with the larger pieces this time. I've got some hot glue just on the top of the side there a little bit, and I'm going to add one of the pieces on an angle. I'm going to hold it there until it sets up. I'll do the same thing for the other side, and what you want to achieve for this project is to be able to have a little bit of a gap at the very top. You can see here that mine are hitting together, so I'm going to just give them a little bit of a push and a wiggle, and I might have to re-glue this one, but I do want to have just a bit of a gap at the top, and you'll see why in a minute. Because I glued these on an angle, there is a tiny gap down at the bottom. I'm going to reinforce that with some more hot glue. With the second block, I'm going to add some glue to the center of it and then center it on top of the bottom block. I'm going to add some glue to the second block in the same place that I did for the first one, and I'm also going to add just a little bit of hot glue on either side of the top of those pieces. That way I'm going to be able to glue everything together, and I'll still have a tiny little gap at the very top. I'll do the same thing for the other side. Here's how they turned out. This last decor piece is something a little different. I'm taking this scrap piece of wood and I'm just going to use this masking tape and tape off the edge all the way around it. That will just give me a nice frame. I'm going to then paint the inside of it with a couple of coats of white chalk paint. If you want to have two coats of paint that have minimal brush strokes and really, really good coverage, change the direction of your brush strokes on the second coat. That is called a crosshatch method, and it will fill in any of the lines that any brush strokes left on the first coat and minimize them on the second coat. I always take my paint off when the paint is still wet, and take a look at this reveal too. It looks so pretty, that natural color of wood against the bright white. I just love it. I'm starting off by inking up some of the IOD Sprague stamps. This was the first investment of IOD stamps that I made, and I really love them. I don't use them a ton, but I really like them for spring. I'm going to go ahead and just use part of this one, and I'm going to stop it at where the white and the natural wood meet. I'm going to add a few more of the stamps, and for some of them, I'm going to let them go right off the wood. That's going to make it look a little bit more whimsical and not quite so perfect. Every once in a while, our Dollar Trees up here in Canada get some really unique and fun items. And these were some of the clear stamps that I got in a little pack from Crafters Square. I was really excited when I found these because they are just perfect for this project. I'm taking a teeny tiny little brush and dipping it ever so slightly in some of these green colored paints and just very gently going over some of the leaves. I don't want to fill everything in. I just want to give it sort of a little whimsical, almost watercolor effect. For the flowers, I am actually going to do a little bit of watercolor. So I dip my paint in some water, and then I dip it in the paint, and then just use a piece of paper and just kind of get the color that I want. And then just very gently, I'm going to go over some of the florals, not again filling them in completely, but just adding a little touch of color here and there. Once I had that complete, I did the same thing with the fan brush, a little bit of white paint and some water, and I just wanted to add a little bit more whimsy to this project. And I think adding the white onto the outside of the frame really brought this piece together. I then decided to add just a touch of green the same way. To hang this piece, I used some little tiny natural colored beads, and I put them on a pretty sturdy wire that would give me a nice shape. Then I added some of these little eye hooks, just screwing them into the top of the board. I'm going to go and use my needle nose pliers to open up the little loop down at the bottom of the beads and then tighten it up. And this will create a beautiful hanger for this piece. I really love how this one turned out. You'll have to let me know what you think.
This last project was super easy to do, and it really packs a lot of wow punch. I'm taking two of these frames that I got from the Dollar Tree. I'm going to paint both of them with white chalk paint. The color I'm using is Rust-Oleum chalk paint in linen white. Next, I'm going to be taking some of these lavender stems, and I'm going to be pulling them off their original little stem parts and making long pieces like you see here on the right. Now I'll just arrange them in a way that I like and make sure that I have enough to fill up the frames. I'm just using this white poster board as a backdrop right now so you can see things better, but I'm not actually going to be putting them on anything. The glass is going to be clear. I'm snipping down some of the extra lavender stems into little bits so I can add them to the bottoms of the stems and make things look a little more realistic. The next step is to take the frames and put the glass back in. I'm giving them a little bit of hot glue in each corner just to hold it in place. This bottom one is face down, and that's how I need it to be. Then I'm going to be adding in the lavender and gluing that into place. Then I'll be taking the next frame, gluing the glass in, and then gluing the two frames together back to back. Basically, I'm making a shadow box frame with a clear backing. I can see many picture frames done this way with different types of florals to suit your own decor. I hope you'll give this a try and let me know what you think of it. I love it. Thank you so much for spending some of your time with me today. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. If you liked this video, here's a couple more that might interest you too. See you in the next one.